welcome everyone to our first SWOOP Academy Masterclass of the year. We're running 4 of these masterclasses throughout the year. The first half of the year will certainly be focusing in on SharePoint intranets, hence the topic of today's discussion, which is about setting goals and measuring success for a high-performing intranet. As I said, please introduce yourselves in the chat. And we're also going to make sure that the slides are available for you. I think Fran will have a few links for you to access the slides during the session if you want to get your hands on them nice and quickly. So we'll share those throughout today as well so that you can get access to them on your desktop as we go. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land on which we're hosting today's online session, and also the traditional custodians of the lands where all of our participants are located today. I'd like to acknowledge the Darkinjung people based here on the New South Wales Central Coast, and they are the traditional owners here. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I also extend my respect to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today on today's session. We have a few of the SWOOP team here today to share with you all of the latest insights and tips and tricks about goal setting for intranets. My name's Emily and I look after the APAC region alongside my colleague Fran, who is here. Fran will be jumping into the conversation, available to take questions in the chat. There'll be resources galore there as well, so please keep an eye on some of those helpful links. We're also joined as well by our product director, Matt Dodd. And Matt Dodd has played a massive role in really being able to bring together a lot of these insights into our SWOOP for SharePoint platform, which is an analytics platform to help you see how your intranet is performing across your organization. But Matt also has extensive experience with managing intranets and will bring, fantastic value to the discussion that we're having today as well. But otherwise, let's just give you a bit of a flavour of the types of things that we're covering today. We want to make sure that you have everything that you need in order to set some more clearly defined goals for your intranet. Now, we'll have like a bit of a disclaimer about this in just a moment, but analytics and measurement and data are all going to be really important things for you to factor in when you are improving your intranet. So we're going to show you how to set actionable goals for your intranets and whatever different contexts and types of organizations you might be operating within. We'll also help you to measure those outcomes more effectively, how to make sure that you're aligning those objectives with your organizational priorities, looking at KPIs, and also making sure that you're communicating effectively to ensure adoption as well. Now I'll switch off these slides in just a moment. We like to kick off with a few quick poll questions just to get a sense of where you're feeling you're up to when it comes to goal setting and measurement of intranets. So I've got 2 quick questions that we'll run through. We'll share a link in the chat, but then I'm also just going to jump across into a separate screen if you just bear with me for one moment. There's just 2 quick questions. 2 questions we're going to get you to answer. You can answer that. You need to answer and submit both of them. But if I just quickly share my browser. We just give 1 second. So you should, if you want to access it just on your phone, sorry, I'll click on this. We've got a big QR code there if you want to access, and it should take you straight through to the poll. Sometimes you get a bit experimental with this, so I'm hoping this all tracks smoothly. So you can use this QR code, still there on the screen, but you'll have 2 questions. The first question is we want to understand, how satisfied are you with how you currently set goals and measure performance of your intranet? And we've got a few different options there, everywhere from very satisfied to very dissatisfied. Oh, well, okay, we've got answers coming through. Sorry, that was a bit of a jump scare. And then our second question, I can toggle back and forth between the 2. Which of the following would you consider as the most important things to measure when it comes to improving your intranet? Emphasis on the word improving. So I'll give you all a moment just to answer those 2 quick questions. They shouldn't require a massive amount of thought. You should know the question straight up. But let's give this a moment to see how this shows. So we've got 8 people who have submitted. I know we've got a few more who maybe just need to catch up. If you're just jumping in, QR code is there, or if you refer to the chat, I think Fran has dropped in Fran has dropped in the link there as well. We'd love to hear about where you're currently at. Okay. In terms of the trend that seems to be emerging for the first question, I'm assuming that's why a lot of you have signed up to be a part of today's session, to get a better hold of how you can do this more effectively. So it looks like majority at the moment are leaning towards dissatisfied with the way that you're currently setting goals and measuring performance. There's a small handful there that are satisfied. So if you'd like to share any of your experiences or any tips in the chat today, please do. Also feel free to raise your hand. We'll introduce you to come off mute, and then you can share a little bit more as well. A few of you kind of 50-50, could go either way. And then there's a small percentage there who seem like super dissatisfied. So welcome. This is a safe space. We'll share more about all of this in just a moment. And then for our second question, what would you consider to be the most important thing to measure when it comes to improving your intranet? I think we gave you the option of selecting, I think, 3 different options there, but in terms of the ones that seem to be the biggest contributors, we're looking at readability of a page or a site, unique visitors to a page or a site. Do we have any others that we're looking to be quite up there? How recently a page was updated, time spent on a page. If you're someone that falls into the other category, please do feel free to share anything additional that you're measuring for improvement. Matt, Fran, like, are there any trends here that are emerging that are surprising, or do they feel pretty aligned with what we're expecting?
It looks pretty much what I was expecting. I think we'll get into some of the detail of the different things that are going to be on there, and why we measure, I guess, what we measure and what went into the product. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and I'm actually quite encouraged that it's not just everybody clicking on views, but
yes,
we'll definitely
as tempting as it can be, of course. So
I also like, we have from Alistair, a good sweet friend in the chat here. Alistair Ayer said his other was, did the page allow the reader to take the desired action, which is just fantastic. Yes, we appreciate it's probably a little bit harder to measure the impact of that, but that's the intranet, right? We want people to get the content and do the action that they are required to do from whatever they may be reading or accessing on the intranet. So that's fantastic. We love that. We love that mindset here.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for contributing to that one. Now I just need to get back up to where we were in the slides, if you just bear with me. Okay. I'm assuming that's showing now. I'm sorry if I can just get a nod. Fantastic. Okay. So we couldn't start a discussion about setting goals, measuring success, etc., without really drilling down to the purposes of an intranet. And it can be several things. So being clear about this is super important. Your goals need to align with that purpose. Prioritize decisions and improvement activities based on what is aligned most with your purpose and for your context. But what you're seeing here on the screen here, this is referring to a step 2's model for the 5 purposes for modern intranets. If you jump to the slides, I think we've got a link there in the chat as well. You need to know what to balance, what balance of purpose is and what that looks like for your current intranet. So I'll just very quickly walk through some of these. Content, perhaps the most widely understood purpose for your intranets, I'm sure. How do you keep it up to date? How do you keep the quality of the content at a high level and also keeping that consistent? Communications and the ways that you're delivering news and other updates. How do you ensure that it's accurate, timely, engaging, making sure that it's targeted to the audiences that you're wanting to reach, and then also bringing in that element of personalization as well. There's culture. So how does the internet contribute to and develop the culture? And how does it also give your employees that sense of belonging? This can also be where look and feel start to be factored into the intranet as well. Collaboration and social, very dear and near to SWOOP's hearts, of course. So how does the intranet support digital collaboration? Can it support better ways of working, providing resources and support to help colleagues improve the way that they work? And then also just on, the activity purpose as well. It's not just a place for doing things. It's not just for reading things, but internet is a place for doing things, but having things like your online forms, You've got tasks and things that you can be completing through the intranet. You've got different apps. It's a front end for many different systems that you'll have running across your organization, and helps to give more of that unified employee experience as well. But these are all, some of those really big reasons why intranets, they still matter. They're super important, and gives even more weight to why it's so important to get it right. But for us to walk through the different ways that you can set goals, measure success, we're going to refer to some of the insights from our 2024 SharePoint Intranet benchmarking study. So we'll present some of those key insights and tie in a few of the goals or ways that you can think about setting goals. But before we get into that, we're very aware that SWOOP is, we're known for running benchmarking studies, and normally we have some really specific numbers and targets that we can share across collaboration platforms. But for intranets, we're going to take a slightly different approach. We can give you some numbers that I think can serve as a bit of a guideline. It's not about hitting the benchmarks that we're about to share as a part, that came off the back of that benchmarking study. But it's more so about setting goals that are tailored to the specific content types. It's about setting goals for specific audiences. You need to think about what your users need to know and how we can make that experience much better for them. And this is going to be a key theme throughout the session, of course, today, moving from this mindset of prove to improve. And we want to empower you with more of those insights and metrics so that your intranet is constantly improving across a heap of those different measures. And we'll get into all of that in just a moment, of course. But we want to keep continuous improvement as the key focus here, not just about going back and seeing, we had this many views on the intranet in the last month. Awesome, we've done our job. We need to dig a little bit deeper than that, of course. But referring back to the points that we've already made about purpose, to set solid goals, we need to review an intranet's purpose. Is it for communication, collaboration, knowledge sharing? Is it for something else? And understanding this will help you to set up the most relevant and achievable goals as well. So I just needed to give that as a little disclaimer before we jump in. So the first insight that we're going to talk to is about who accesses the intranet. And for anyone who just needs to quickly get up to speed on the 2024 intranet benchmarking, I know there's quite a few of you here who would be quite familiar with the insights. For some of you, this might be new. The insights that we're looking at here were from a 3-month period. And one of the things that we found as a part of that study that we ran last year is that on average, 86% of employees were visiting the intranet. And that's a pretty solid number. And I think it tells us that the original purpose of the intranet has been for, the enterprise information base. And, these numbers certainly tie in with that as well. But of the 86%, we've got 87% viewing content pages and 60% of those people reading news content. I think there's probably also another thing that you want to keep in mind is that for many of you, and you can maybe share some of your experiences with this in the chat as well. For some of you, your intranet might be like your default browser page as well. So we certainly can't ignore the fact that that is something that can certainly be adding a lot of weight to that access percentage as well. And we'll also have another key theme that will flow throughout today's session, as well as this concept of having a time budget. So users of the intranet, they have a certain time budget that we need to work within, which makes it even more important for us to really showcase the news and content that your colleagues need to know so that they can make the most of their very short visits to the intranet as well. Matt, do you want to share a little bit about the intranet mantra as well? Because I think it ties in nicely with some of the goal setting stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that I used to use in government websites and various other things. So I can't claim kind of to have invented it, but really it was more about when we think about people, and Alistair kind of nailed it with his idea of measure what people want to do. That becomes about whether the intranet is actually useful to a person. most of the analytics that we look at, or lots of people bandy around, are all about usage, you know, and adoption. And that's obviously what this initial kind of insight is. This 86% of people connecting with their intranets is showing, yes, intranets are used, but what we really then want to develop is, are they going to be useful for the people that they want, and actually are they usable? So is that task easy for them to complete? So that's why we kind of came up with this or adopted this intranet mantra, to sort of really say it's not just usage. If you're just focusing on usage, you're missing this trick to, as Emily's already said, to go from proving to improving. So we've got a few things in the product that really allow you to look at whether we're connecting to the right audiences, how easy it is, what's the experience. And I think that's really important to consider when you're setting goals, and starting to think about what are the metrics that we want to gather up and use and present.
Now, when it comes to the purpose of looking, you know, at monitoring things like readership, just referring back to that original insight that we had there, it's important for a few different reasons, of course. You know, readership metrics, they can help you get a rough idea of how engaged employees are with your internal comms. If you've got a high percentage of employees that are accessing the intranet, you know, at a very high level, you're going to get an idea of if they're interested in some of that content being shared. We've got a few ideas a little bit further down as well, which we'll get to in just a moment. But then breaking down the readership into more specific categories. So even just starting with breaking down that readership to look at content versus sort of content pages versus looking at news pages, and also seeing what is resonating more with your employees. And referring back to the insight, of course, you know, the data shows that while 87% of intranet visitors read content pages, we've got only 60% there that are reading news pages. So may indicate that maybe, you know, news articles require a little bit more strategic planning as well. In terms of the way that it's trending as well, just quickly seeing Eleanor's point there, where we're currently about to start crunching the numbers for the 2025 SharePoint intranet benchmarking. So I think coming up to about May this year, we'll have fresh insights to share with you. So it'll be really interesting to see if there's any clear trends year on year with what we're seeing. We'll have more details for how you can register to receive that report coming soon. We don't have it right now, but just to give you a heads up that those insights, they are coming. In terms of understanding the differences in the ways that readership can also inform your strategy, you know, news articles are not attracting the same readership as other content pages. You need to consider how news is presented and how it's promoted. But you should also consider, you know, tracking and creating your own benchmarks internally for this too. So if you do currently have access to a tool like SWOOP for SharePoint, for example, when you get started, certainly go in and start to get an idea of what that benchmark looks like for your organization. And then as you are, you know, when you look at more of those metrics that focus on improvement, you can see how that starts to have more of an impact. We also wanted to give you an idea of how we would suggest you approach setting goals around this. So if you were wanting to see what a good target is, you know, like we've said, around that 90% mark, like Matt is like, these are sort of more of those rough guidelines for us to share at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's really more an indicator, and obviously, again, it does depend on the individual circumstances of the organisations. I put a couple of comments in the chat. You know, intranets are very different from company to company. We certainly see that with all our customers. You know, there are some commonalities, but there are lots of things and lots of different purposes and things that people are doing. Lots of different setup choices, whether it's in, you know, the default browser window or not. So I think, you know, if you've got it as a default browser window, I'd definitely be expecting, or really want, you know, you should be hitting 90%, I would hope. And I think that is a good goal to set. I think we are looking at the, you know, if you don't, then, you know, 70%, 80% is probably not a bad target to go for. But again, it'll depend on the makeup of the workforce, how many people have different devices, what access to devices. So this is very much a I guess it's the same as when people measure kind of click-throughs and things on emails. You know, this is an aggregated total. So if you're not far from that, I don't think it's worth worrying. I think it's then about saying, well, what is my current adoption and where do I want to actually try and get it to? What is a reasonable thing? So that's the caveat I would put on that one.
But then also being able to layer in things like the visitor personas as well, depending on the content type. So whatever the purpose is for that particular piece of content, there is going to be a different persona, I'm sure, that you would be striving to achieve. And it's not that any of the personas that we look at in SWOOP for SharePoint are, you know, any better or worse than each other, but it's just making sure that that visitor persona for the particular piece of content that you're looking at aligns with what you're wanting to achieve with it. So like, Matt, is this where you would have, you know, if it's a piece of content where you want people to go in, find the information quickly, then you'd be okay if they're classified as, say, like a scanner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the personas that we have are built around that. So I guess unlike some of our Viva Engage personas where there are good personas, I mean, really the only really bad persona in SWOOP for SharePoint is glancers. You know, they're literally not spending enough time on the page to actually really do anything. So I think maybe if you were to set anything would be to say, well, we want to reduce the glancers because they're the people that are ending up on a page by mistake, kind of wasting their time, maybe getting lost. So that's a really good indicator for that one. The rest of them are, yeah, scanners, speed readers, are very much seeking quick information. The scanning time, when we look at read times, is all about finding a keyword or a link. So if your page is I don't know, the index, if the page that you look after is, say, the index of all the different systems in a company, you know, you don't want people there having to read through the whole page to find what you're looking for. You'd want to have people that were just, you know, jumping on the page, finding the link, and off they go. So it's thinking about that purpose of the page. Whereas obviously if you're producing news, or maybe it's a policy or something like that, you're going to want to get people into that speed reading or reading category at least, because that would mean that they've actually had enough time to at least kind of get the general message about what the page is about. And equally, if you've got some other things, you might well go, actually camping's not a bad thing. You know, if it's say a price list for your sales team or something like that, they may have that open quite a lot in their browser. So actually camping wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing in that circumstance. But if you had people camping on a page where you were expecting them to find information quickly, then that may indicate that you've got a different problem.
I'm just seeing there's a quick question in the chat here. Can we associate a visitor persona to a page? So we can say, for example, this page should be mostly scanners. So if we're seeing lots of readers, then could that mean that we're doing something wrong?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that's about the knowledge that you have about that page. We can only pick up the sort of the data that's happening. We don't know, and we don't interpret what that page's meaning is. But obviously, that's something that you do know. So yeah, I would definitely be looking at that and say, well, yeah, I'd expect this to be mainly scanners, or speed readers. Again, if you're looking at something like a news page, I would hope, you know, speed readers is the key thing. Sorry, yes, a short answer. I will be quite hard. Yes.
Oh no, and not to say that wasn't a great explanation, Matt. I'm just thinking you can, like, I think that's where, like, just to come back to the point about goal setting, like we're going beyond just looking at, you know, total number of views. Being able to really drill into what the actual behaviors are of people on the page, and if that lines up with the intended purpose, that's where you can start to make much more impactful improvements to the way that you're putting content on the intranet. So this is just like a bit of you can see there's that persona example, visitor persona report example there on the screen. Like if you wanted to look at this we can look at this on like the site level and on a particular page level as well. So yeah, it's just making sure that whatever the persona is lining up with, you know, what that intended purpose is. And, you know, a few other ideas there is around, you know, setting more of those specific readership goals for particular audiences. So ensuring that you're doing that audience targeting a lot more effectively. As I mentioned before, breaking it down between readership of news versus content and getting a little bit more of a split to see what that behavior looks like. And we'll talk a little bit more to the key statistics and perhaps nudge you in the direction of maybe some better behaviors around that as well. Let me see. Let's have a look at another insight. In terms of devices. Now, for this particular insight, like, we're not going to say, you know, the goal that you should be setting because our benchmarking study says that everyone is using the internet on their desktop. Like, we're not necessarily going to say, well, you know, ignore mobile or anything like that. But when it comes to, you know, turning this type of insight into action and being able to refer to what that currently looks like for your intranet, which of course you can also do in SWOOP for SharePoint if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet. But if you are analysing the types of devices that people are using, well, then you also get a bit more insight into how people are interacting with content on the internet overall. So if you have a significant number of users that are accessing via mobile devices, then maybe it indicates the need to, you know, look at optimizing what that experience looks like for those particular users. And that should, you know, then start to inform your strategy around content delivery, user engagement, all of those wonderful things. But when it comes to setting goals around this, and like, I guess sometimes it opens up a can of worms. It always feels like a bit of a chicken or the egg type sort of scenario when it comes to mobile.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that one. It's really hard to think about, should we get, you know, do we have a big online remote workforce? What devices do they have? What are the activities that they're performing? Should they be able to get to the intranet? Can they? We just know that the reality from all the companies we look at is that its mobile usage is low.
And we also, like, sometimes the mobile topic comes up a lot in, well, if we think about the way that we approach external websites and more from that like consumer lens, it's mobile first for everything. But of course, what we're seeing through the benchmarking is that that's not, you know, always the case in the way that we look at what that actual consumption behavior looks like. So rather than think about the way that employees, you know, are accessing information, like, always think about that within the context that is relevant for your organization as well. It's not about, you know, this insight's not saying don't do mobile, of course, like we're not saying that. But make sure that you're using the data that's available to you to inform that approach if it does need to be improved. And if anyone has any other, like, if I'm just thinking for people who are participating in today's session, if you want to share about any of your experiences around mobile, if you know that people are accessing the internet through mobile, maybe some of you have, you know, big initiatives or projects coming up to optimize your internet for mobile usage. It'd be great to hear some of those experiences as well. But in the meantime, let's jump on to the next insight. So this is around how much time employees are spending visiting and reading the intranet. And what we found is kind of the big key insight is that the average time spent on the intranet was 16 minutes per day. And the vast majority of that is all centered around reading content pages. And it's only 1 minute for when we look at news. And that might not sound like very much at all, but the news does present quite an interesting challenge, actually. So news follows, and I'll show an example of this in a little bit further down the track, but news does sort of follow that long tail of digital distribution where you might have, you know, big blockbuster news that takes up the vast majority of the visits, and then everything else maybe doesn't receive as much attention. But when we're looking at what's interesting, and it's kind of, you know, in the writing that you'll see on the slide here as well, is if we work with the median rather than looking at the average, the median time is actually then only 7 minutes. And the median time of reading the news is just 18 seconds. So if you have to take anything away from these insights when it comes to setting goals, we don't have a lot of time to work with when it comes to how we're going to target specific audiences. So for anyone here who's, managing an intranet, it's really important to tailor that content to fit that very brief amount of time that your employees are willing to commit to being on the intranet. So for maximum impact, think about the key messaging, what you'd like to prioritize, allowing for that, small window of their attention span. And then also put yourself in the shoes of the people who are accessing the intranet. What are the things that people need to know? And we also need to anticipate what people are going to the intranet for, have an objective and a purpose for that page, and then also layer in the way that we're thinking about that time budget that we keep talking about. And I think that's also highlighted in a few different ways in this slide as well. But maybe if we get straight into the goal setting side around it. Now, views, visit. What's the other V? The visits, views, visitors.
Visitors, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a funnel.
Yeah. Now, like the survey question that we asked at the start, of course, we were kind of silently really happy that there probably wasn't a massive percentage of people saying that they were just looking at, those very raw, very high level viewership numbers. And the thing that we would say around setting goals for this particular, in terms of time spent, avoid just looking at the views. It is so easy to get caught up in those, what we would consider to be vanity metrics, but they certainly don't tell you a full story. We need to dig a lot deeper. So make sure that you are setting those sort of time spent type goals for particular audiences, or looking at those numbers to inform what that approach is going to be. Improve over just prove, remember. So set goals on the content type, the purpose of the content, whether is it for training, is it for communication, is it for knowledge sharing? That will also help you to set the much more relevant goals for what you're trying to achieve. The time budget is probably the most important thing that we want you to take away from this particular insight. You can also cross-reference that with the typical time spent that you'll see as a part of your engagement score in SWOOP. We'll show you some examples of the engagement score a little bit later. But this is the part, like if you are looking at a SWOOP dashboard, Matt, I'm just thinking if we should talk a little bit to why what we have circled here.
Yeah. So
better metric to look at.
I mean, obviously, views is a raw count of activity, so it's not unimportant. It's the basis of what we measure, but there's no way of necessarily discerning is that number of views one person looking at a page lots of times or lots of people looking at the page once. So that's to me the insights we want to be getting to is trying to get to connecting those measures and analytics to actual people and actual activity. So that's why obviously the sort of highlighted one there is visitors. That's why if we talk about things, I would be focusing on visitor numbers, because on an intranet, unlike a lot of public facing websites, people are logged in, they've got their M365 account, so we know that we can associate their views to an actual person. So I think that's why we really focus on the visitor numbers. The visits are, for us, it's like a session of activity. It's the same as if you visited the supermarket. You go in, you might go up and down different aisles, but that single time you're in the store, we would count as one visit. And then the pages that you go to is like, which aisles did you go down whilst you're in the supermarket? So it gives a much better idea as to what activity and how you actually, one of the discussions we had when we were preparing this was how do you define something as popular? So views are important in that popularity, because what you can find is there might be lots of visits, but there might be substantially even more views. So that would show that people are even within one session of activity on the intranet, they're going back to that page. Now, again, the type of page is important. If it's like, say, a departmental landing page, I would expect that to have a much higher number of views than visits. And the visitor numbers you'd want, or you'd hope, would be probably similar, or you should be targeting to be similar to how many people are actually in that department. You would want you would hope and want that the department that you built the page for is accessing it. So I think it's just important to really think that we need to do it. And I think Mark's put there will be a degree of confirmation bias. It gives us the remit to make improvements. Absolutely. I think, yeah, people like big numbers. They like to feel that this is great. But I think when you get into it, that's really important. And it's also important when we look at the visitor persona, because the visitor persona is based on the time that they spend on a page. So again, it's not just that they're seeing the page, it's not just that they visited the page, it's does that give them enough time to complete that expected activity? And that's why those things I think are important to use in conjunction, so that you get I'd say a better picture, and then you can actually set those goals and say, well, yeah, for our news, our news pages, we should be aiming to get this percentage of speed readers, and maybe this, or a net, you could look at it at speed readers and readers and campers combined is above a certain, split of the percentage.
And for anyone who's looking for maybe a little bit more structure as well around how you can set these goals that are more improvement focused, I should have mentioned this at the start actually as well, but I saw that Fran had popped a link into the chat as well. We've created just a really simple template for you to get started. It may be a little bit more useful because a lot of the metrics, these are metrics that you'll access in SWOOP for SharePoint. So if you did want just to get your hands on something to get you started, to guide you, and to just give you a heads up about some of the metrics that we would recommend that are focused on improvement, you can download that through the link that Fran has just popped into the chat. So fantastic starting point. It's a free resource. Go crazy. Even if you're not using SWOOP as well, like just to give you a bit of a breakdown of the things that we would recommend, like please do go in and access that. Share it around, share it with your colleagues, share it in your networks. Go for it. Our next lot of insights are looking at when people read the intranet. So the insight that came from our benchmarking was that peak reading times are between that 8 to 9 a.m. or 1 till 3 p.m. mark, more likely on a weekday. Tuesday is just edged ahead of the other days in the week in terms of having the biggest audience. There is, this trend with news consumption happening in the morning, of course, and then perhaps people are catching up on some of those stories in the afternoon. But when it actually comes to monitoring and setting goals around this, like you don't have, like this again is where you need to refer to the insights within your own organization that are most relevant. Like this is just looking across that sort of full benchmarking sample that we looked at. But this is where you will go in and then review your own peak readership times as well. So you can go in and review that, looking at, I'll show you the reports that you can look at in SWOOP in just a second. But you'll just be looking at things like your activity by time, but also, again, this is where you can break this down for particular audiences. Like you can look at this for your entire intranet, of course, that might be an interesting thing to have a look at. But if you do look at it on more of an audience basis, or looking at it on a content type basis as well, that's something to consider. Let me just show you in terms of reviewing that and putting it into action with some of the data. The first one that you'll see there is what our standard activity by time report is going to tell you, so you can really clearly see days of the week, times of the day, and then breaking that down for maybe it's for a particular site, maybe it's for a particular piece of content, is it for a particular audience, and then starting to really map out and look at that metric to inform how you're going to take your next steps. And the second example is that we have there is activity over time. I think this also then ties in with what we look at with sort of like the life cycle of a piece of news on the internet as well. And so we found that that's sort of like typically, and I think you probably almost see that trend in the screenshot example that you see here. It lasts about a week. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah. A week or thereabouts, and then it dies, unless it's a really big news item.
And then it might go on for a little bit longer. And then also when you compare it to it's a little bit different as well when we look at this. I'm sure we'll get into looking at things around like Viva Engage as well. But Fran, is that where like Viva Engage, it's a little bit, it's can be stretched out a lot longer?
Yeah, so when you look at the lifespan of messages across different platforms, I mean, as we know, SharePoint, Viva Engage, Teams, sort of other third-party platforms as well, it all sort of sits in the environment of comms and getting that information out to employees. And I guess it's the thought of, how long do I want this to last? You know, if it's a news article that is maybe the update and it's sitting in that week, then yep, do your SharePoint thing. But then when we compare that to some of our research on Viva Engage, we can see that messages there can last up to around 21 days. So if you're wanting that message to sort of resonate and maybe last a little bit longer and generate conversation, but that's a whole different webinar and masterclass that we'll probably have, you can sort of consider the play with the different platforms there. But it is interesting to see the lifespan across similar, but of course different platforms.
And we'll dive into that a little bit more in just a moment in terms of looking at more of looking across multiple channels. We'll get to that insight, but we've got a few quick content focused insights. We've pulled these two ones together. The first one here is looking at, we're almost treating this as like what we're calling an anti-goal. When we were preparing for this, we said like this is the anti-goal. Well, we know that this is the average of what we're seeing, you know, between the 300 to 600 words. The topic of what you're sharing about is going to far outweigh the impact than what it may be with the length of the article as well. And this also, like, this is another one of these insights that puts a pretty clear spotlight on the time budget. So when it comes to internet news articles, we found the top 10% of news pages visited attracted 72% of all visit times. So if I just run through to the goal setting, focus on this is, you know, don't just follow this set goal for length. It's always going to be more so about quality over quantity. We'll show you an example of an engagement score. So engagement scores would certainly be the metric that you should go to understand if your content is of a high quality, and that's what really matters. Specifically as well, alongside your engagement score, you'll also have an experience score. And as a part of your experience score, you'll be able to see things like readability. So if we wanted to then go back and sort of set some more targeted goals around content quality, this is where we would say, well, having a readability score below 0 is going, I'm sorry, not 0, 30. Readability score below 30 is going to be a much more impactful goal to work towards, rather than making sure that all of your articles are between 300 to 600 words. Yeah. Making it easy to read and easy to understand is the key thing. Like, you could make an article really hard to read within 300 to 600 words too, just in the way that you write it, of course. So it's not going to solve all your problems hitting that particular metric. Look at readability, look at experience, look at engagement. I think through some of the case studies as well, where we found there to be quite high performing news articles, as well as, you know, this factoring in a human interest angle with what you're sharing as well.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is, I know, having worked in comms teams, it's very easy to set goals around news in terms of that volume. You know, we're going to produce this number of news items a week, they're going to be this long. It's quite an easy thing to kind of feel like it's a goal, feel like it's something that you can target. But the reality is, it doesn't make that much. Well, the more you actually produce, the less they're going to get read. That is the reality of what we're finding, you know. So one well-crafted news item, probably about human interest, could be 1,500 words long, will get much more readership than, you know, publishing 5 separate news items. But the readability, yeah, as Emily said, I think is really important, because that's about making it accessible for people to read the information and take away the messages. And it's very easy to get caught up with jargon and complicated sentences and structures. It's got to be written pretty plainly for people to be able to understand.
I think this particular view here that we're seeing, it actually might tie in quite nicely with the next masterclass session that we'll be running, which is going to really focus on anyone who is an author of content across the intranet and being able to empower them with more of these sort of health related insights to keep them accountable for the content that they're responsible for. Just for those examples that we were talking to, you can see that experience score on the right-hand side, and just below there is where you'll see that readability score as well. So if you are referring to the template that Fran had shared about setting goals, then that's where you'll be able to find more of that information. And if you do want to, dedicate a bit of time to running through those goals as well with Fran and myself, if you are a SWOOP user, then please don't hesitate to reach out. Like, we can certainly help you to run those sessions, all included as a part of your subscription to SWOOP. There's also, just to share as well, if you wanted to get a bit of a gauge of the content that is the most popular, then you can also quickly run through and see, what are our most popular pages, most popular news, most popular files, and so on. Just to let you know that you can also layer in that type of insight as well. But for our final insight, and where we'll then also share with you some other helpful resources, we found that people who read the intranet are also active on Viva Engage. And this, brings in some of those thought starters that we have around, having more of that multi-channel approach when it comes to sharing content. But it's also more interesting when as part of this insight too, is that those people who are heavy email users are sometimes the least engaged intranet users. Maybe some of that's a surprise. Maybe that's, a shock for some of you. I'm not 100% sure. But when it comes to setting goals around this, review those most active audiences across all of your channels. Knowing who's engaging with your content will help you to tailor that content more effectively. And we've got a point there about, not thinking about your intranet in isolation. It's certainly a very important part of that broader ecosystem of communication tools that you have at your disposal at the moment. And maybe one of the more important parts there is about tailoring the content to the channel. And just please do not, copy and paste the way that you're presenting that message across those different channels. So it should be, totally different in the way that you're framing that on SharePoint versus, putting a post out on Viva Engage versus, putting an email update out there. So, the news item on the intranet, it should cover off, maybe more of the message in more strategic detail, build out the story, bring in the human interest angle where you can. And then on Viva Engage, it's also, starting a conversation about that particular update, inviting more people in to contribute, building on more of that collaboration and two-way relationships for whatever the topic of the story is. The message, the overall message can be the same, but the method in which you're sharing it is going to be different. That's probably a big,
I think that's right, and I think the email part of that email, I think it does also relate and crosses back to some of that mobile adoption. If people have got a mobile device, it's very easy for people to pick up and consume an email. They're used to doing that. Mm-hmm. I know people in the comments had said, it can be difficult to log into different things on your mobile, and depending on what your security enabled, but it's pretty reasonable to expect people can access an email. So I think there is that definite relationship there for maybe sort of frontline workers. So it may not be what they prefer, or it may be that's actually, it makes perfect sense to tailor those messages. But yeah, you can drive disengagement potentially if you just plaster everything everywhere and it's a message that just doesn't resonate with people.
And in terms of, if you wanted to create a bit more of an improvement focused scorecard in the way that you're looking at analytics, here's just another sort of roundup of some reports that you can access in SWOOP for SharePoint as well. Things like being able to quickly go in and see the pages that have issues and exactly what those issues are. That will all be served up for you based on priority. The health scores are really useful. Even being able to quickly see how, the age of the content that you have on the intranet and breaking that down as well. But like even more useful will be the template that Fran has been sharing in the chat as well. We originally had a QR code for this one as well on the slide, but then I thought, wait a second, like I don't think you're going to be editing and putting your goals into a PowerPoint presentation on your phone if you're using the QR code on anyway. So we'll give you the link in the chat so that you can download the goal setting template. Free resource. Go crazy. Have a look and see how you're stacking up, and start to review and then see how you can improve using these metrics as well. There are some key questions that we wanted to leave you with as well.
Yeah, I'll. Do you want me to jump in? I think.
Yeah.
This is, as we said right at the beginning, it's sometimes difficult for us to give actual numbers. We are working on trying that with the benchmarking study that we're pulling together for that May release that we've already mentioned. So we are trying to get some more of these, I guess, generalized figures that you can use as a starting point for a goal or a target. But really what's important is, you know, the purpose of the intranet, how you define it. It is so different. It can be so different. So it's taking some of this with some of these, even our own figures, with a pinch of salt. You know, your situation may be very different to another company. So whilst benchmarking can be useful and we can give you a good indicator, think of it as that as an indicator more than as an absolute, you know, set in stone goal. So how you define it is important. The popularity of something, we've mentioned it a few times. You can look at popular news items, popular pages. Define what you mean by popular, because there are different flavors of that. You know, is it the number of unique visitors in the time frame that go and see it, have seen it at least once? Or is it something like, yeah, actually, I do want to look at the views or visits, because are people coming back to that page lots of times? They're both is a different flavor of popular. So again, I would be saying, before you set the goal, define what you mean by the terms, because that's going to be really important. The audiences are. We've spoken about frontline workers. We've spoken about people with mobile access, those sorts of things. You know, are you genuinely? Is that something that you want to include? How are you get? You know, what attributes of those people are you going to use to define them? Do you want to look at things like leadership levels as opposed to just departments, so you can see, are people, you know, are the kind of information brokers in your organization getting hold of the information, because they're, you know, supervisors and managers may well pass information on. So it's not just thinking about the sort of basic, what department are they in? And I think then, you know, going back to the thing, and I'll put a link into an article. I used to follow a guy called Jerry McGovern in the UK. He does a lot of work. He talks about top tasks. And I know we've mentioned that a few times, but that's really thinking about, yeah, what do we want them to do on this site, on this pages, on the intranet as a whole. And it is challenging yourself. And I know, well, from experience, a lot of internal comms teams are associated with external comms teams who have these standard measures and things, you know, and these kind of concepts that, you want to have people staying around and hanging around on your website, because if they're on your website for a long time, you know, they're likely to purchase or buy. And so these kind of rules of thumb get taken as the things that you need to do on an intranet, but actually they're very different. You know, I would be arguing that single page visits to not necessarily the home page, but to say a policy or something that you've put in an email is exactly what you want, because people go, get the information and leave and carry on with their job. You don't want them hanging around your intranet struggling to find things. You want them to be really quick and swift and get what you want. So some of those I'm sure you will encounter, but it is really being clear what are the goals? What are the measures that then that we can associate with those goals? Is there something we can directly measure? And I know Alice goes back to that question, the point that Alistair made right at the top of the comment section around, you know, understanding their activity on the page. It's hard to measure sometimes what the intent is, or is it a good enough proxy that at least gives us some confidence? You know, so we might not be able to measure the direct outcome, but what we might measure is one step behind that. You know, whereas if you just measure views, that's almost right at the top of that kind of funnel of activity to get you to that point. So how close, if you can't measure the thing directly, what are you measuring and how close is it? How close an approximation can it be? And get as close as you can. That's what I would leave up with.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I feel like that's the perfect point for us to sort of officially close things out for today. But I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the other resources that you can access. We actually do have our next Intranet Masterclass coming up on I believe it's the 10th of April. It's another Thursday session. Same time slot, and that one's going to be covering empowering your content owners through using health scores. We'll have a few of these links popping up for you in the chat as well. Now, we also are very excited because we have our SharePoint Intranet Festival coming back for the second year. That will be coming up in May. You can register for that session now. And we actually have some fantastic speakers lined up for our APAC session. I actually think I saw a few of our speakers hovering around in the chat today. So we have NRMA presenting. I think we've also got a few people in the chat who are from various government departments and agencies. We'll have Services Australia featuring with a really great story about their intranet. We have Australian Super who'll be sharing. Microsoft will be there. SWOOP will be there, of course. So if you're wanting to learn more about, you know, a lot of the insights and the things we've spoken about today in practice and how different organizations have maybe overcame some of these challenges that we talk about all the time, maybe how they're still sort of chipping away at things as well, so that you don't feel as alone in some of the things that you might be coming up against with your intranets. This will be the go-to session for you, so strongly encourage that you register for that session. If you do need to catch up on some of those benchmarking insights from our report last year, you can still download that report for free. So encourage you to do that as well. As I mentioned earlier in the session, we will have our fresh lot of insights in our 2025 report coming to you in the next few months. So we'll be crunching the numbers very, very soon to deliver you all of those nice up-to-date insights. So you have that to look forward to. But otherwise, massive thank you to everyone for participating. It was great to see so much great activity in the chat. You know, connect with each other and, you know, keep asking questions. But otherwise, I hope we see you at the next masterclass, and then after that at the festival. Feel free to hang around if you'd like to ask Fran and Matt and myself any questions. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the week.